And I know in my heart that it's not that these people don't want to make accessible content. They don't know what they don't know. And so they're not thinking about what, the impacts that their choices might have. And I'm like, I can write a book about this. There's a ton of books for authors and such out there, but this was really a niche that I hadn't seen. And so, about a year ago, it became the idea to make a book that, made it all on the level, not the way that Michele and I talk to our clients, but how we would approach this audience who isn't technical. I had Will in mind, my husband, as I was writing this. Like, if we do this in a way that he understands and how to take the action, we've done it right.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 294 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, we're talking about content for everyone with Jeff Adams and Michele Lucchini. Jeff Adams is a writer, the co-host of the Big Gay Fiction podcast, and a certified professional in accessibility core competencies by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And Michele Lucchini is the Vice President of Delivery and Accessibility Operations for UseableNet, who oversees the team's responsibility for ensuring client success in their digital accessibility program. We talk about accessibility, their new co-authored book, Content for Everyone, and so much more. And that's coming up later in this podcast. First, a word about this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. Now, one of the ways you can make your books accessible to more people is to produce an audiobook. Well, how do you produce an audiobook? You need a narrator, you need to do all kinds of stuff. Well, Findaway Voices makes that easier for you. You can go to Findaway, you put in your metadata for the audiobook you want to have, and then you can use their Voices Marketplace where you can find an audiobook narrator of your own. You can choose from thousands of narrators out there, or if you have already produced your own audiobook, maybe you already worked with a professional narrator and you've licensed the work from them, you can use Findaway Voices, just upload your files. And with Findaway Voices, you can distribute that to more than 43 retail and library platforms. Oh, hey, speaking of library platforms, making your ebooks via Draft to Digital, for example, or making your audiobooks via Findaway Voices accessible to patrons of libraries increases your availability and your accessibility as an author. So if you want to check out how you can work to make more accessible content in the audiobook sphere, you can check out Findaway Voices over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. I kind of like when I can tie in the topic of the episode to the ad read. Isn't that neat? I sometimes impress myself. Well, what are you going to do? All right, comments from recent episodes. Over on the Twitter sphere, Edwin Downward said, about episode 293, The Capacity to Unlearn and Relearn with Diane DeVenye. Edwin says, the latest Stark Reflections podcast hits close to home. There are reasons why I've referred to graduation from high school as escaping the institution that parallel his guest's journey in so many ways. For me, writing is the ways I kept the mold from taking hold. So true, Edwin. Sometimes we learn things not necessarily great for creativity. we're trained to be really good factory workers. That's kind of what the education system's still based upon, as opposed to the individualized learning that is so important. And individualized learning, when you think about it, and yeah, I'm going to tie this back into the theme for today's episode, it's about accessibility, is that education is not necessarily accessible because different people learn in different ways. And our systems don't really accommodate for that. Sometimes awesome teachers do within the system, but those are the exceptions, right? Who go above and beyond what the system is forcing them to do. But that is why I read the poem that Diane included at the end of her book, Dear Genius, and included part of it in last week's episode, but the full poem over at patreon.com/starkreflections. I'm also on Twitter. I mean, so many folks who attended a virtual webinar I did with Wolf Moon love the content. So many wonderful comments from people how much they appreciated it and loved it, and that just made me feel good. Now, this webinar was a reward for a recent Kickstarter that Wolf ran for his forthcoming books on how to write award-winning short fiction, and I just want to say thanks to everyone who shared their experiences there. And lastly, a comment from one of my patrons who sent me a direct message. And this patron tends to binge listen to a whole number of episodes in a row. So maybe goes a couple months and then just listens to 8 episodes or whatever. And they were playing catch up and messaged me to comment on, this is my desire, and I mentioned this earlier in the year, probably in January, that I was changing my patron, because again, I wanted everyone to have access. Oh my God, the accessibility theme just runs thick here. Is you can, it's $1 or $3, $5 a month, and I had different levels. So, at $1 a month, you're like, hey, thanks, and I'll thank you. And $3 a month, you get access to the audio feed and stuff like that. And then $5 a month, there was additional videos and other content. And I just thought, no, you know what? I'm going to just make the content available to all the patrons as a thank you to all the patrons, regardless of where they want to. And so they can, if they want to, drop down to $1, because, hey, it just makes it a lot more affordable. It's $12 a year, as opposed to, and I can't do the math because I don't have my shoes and socks off, $5 a month, which would be at least $50. Oh, no, my God, that's $60, isn't it? $60 a year. But anyways, I wanted to make it more accessible for anyone who just wanted access for as little as $1 a month. But this person said, and this is just me wanting to make it more accessible to everyone. And they said that the bonus content is great that they get as a patron, but the reason they're a patron isn't for the bonus content. The reason they're a patron is because they appreciate the podcast and want to support it. And I want to say thank you to that patron. And again, I didn't check with you to make sure if I could share your name, so I'm keeping it anonymous. When you binge listen to this, you'll hear this in May or June or July. But I just want to thank you, and I want to thank all the people who support this podcast over at patreon.com. And I did have, during one of the sessions I recorded and shared in the podcast feed, I did have a number of those patrons say that the reason that they're supporting me is not to get access to the additional content, because they're just generous people and they want to support the podcast. So I want to thank all my awesome patrons for supporting the podcast, but I also want to thank all of my awesome listeners for listening to the podcast. I know you're out there. I know you're listening to this right now. Well, I don't really know, but I'm assuming, because if you're listening, anyways, it's just one of those weird time continuum things. But thanks for being a listener. If you do want to support the podcast, of course, feel free to share it with someone that you think would find value in the podcast, or leave a review. I mean, those are the two of the greatest ways you can continue to support me, other than continuing to listen every week. Thank you so much. And just a reminder as we get to the end of the comments is, please, I want you to share your own reflections on anything related to your writing and publishing journey. Maybe it's something you've learned from one of the almost 300 episodes that are in existence here. Maybe it's something you've just been reflecting on for whatever reason. Maybe it's something you wish you'd known when you were just beginning, or as a just beginning writer, it's something you want to know. Just all those reflections, any of those reflections, there will be a form over at starkreflections.ca for this episode 294, where you can share those reflections with me. I mean, if you're so inclined, record the reflection, email me, mark@markleslie.ca, or type it in. And I'm going to see if I can get some guest voices to help me read those reflections, so you're not just listening to my voice, because I want to hear your voice. I want to hear your reflections. I think that's one of the best ways of celebrating my 300th episode, is more of you, more of diversity, more content, more of those things, because I know we're all going to learn from the awesome things that you are thinking about in your own writer journey. So for personal update, It is a Read an eBook week. So, March 5th to 11th is Read an eBook week, and this is 2023 when I'm recording this. And it's probably too late if you haven't joined in, but, Smashwords has long done a celebratory sale where authors can discount their books, and Smashwords does a lot to promote and feature them. And I have a bunch of books there. Now, this is a reminder because maybe for next time, the next time a sale like this happens, here's some of the things that I did. So there's assets that Draft2Digital and Smashwords provided. There's a page once you opt in to have your books at a discount. And this is a coupon code discount, so you're not going to get dinged with price matching. And they've been doing this since the inception of Smashwords. And, okay, that's 12 years, something like that. And Amazon's never price matched. So, for those of you who are panicked and worried and filled with anxiety, don't. Just take advantage of this. Now, what I did is I took the graphics and then I added a bunch of the covers of my books, and then a link specifically to the books in question, whether it's a single book, whether it's, an imprint, whether it's a series, whatever. And you can do all that on the Smashwords store. Here's the cool thing about publishing the Smashwords store. And you can do it now through Draft2Digital. If you are a Smashwords author, they're going to be migrating you over to Draft2Digital anyway. And the only way to get into the Smashwords store is going to be through Draft2Digital. But you earn 80%. 80%. Normally, from Draft2Digital to a retailer, you're getting 60%. You'd get 70% if you went direct, 60% there. But you earn 80%. And I kind of like that because that's really, really high margin. And I like that. I mean, the next best margin I get is, when I sell direct, I'm making 95%. But I don't have as much traffic going to my sell direct platforms yet. I haven't done a lot of work there. But there are millions of customers in the Smashwords store. So why not take advantage of that other major retailer that is available in most countries around the world. So right now, for example, you can get any of the books that I've written for writers in my Stark Publishing Solutions series for 75% off. That's right. Also, all of my Canadian werewolf novels, 75% off as well. And that's pretty exciting. Speaking of Canadian werewolf novels, very last bit of personal update is on Tuesday, March 14th, the eve of the Ides of March. Julie Strauss and I are hosting a live chat about co-authoring as part of celebrating our new novel, Hex and the City. Co-authored novel, book six? Yes, book 6 in the Canadian werewolf series. While Lover's Moon was a romance, paranormal romantic comedy, meant to be a standalone, it did have a prologue and an epilogue that were set in modern time with Gail and Michael, and it kind of continues the story. So while that romance was in answer to some of the readers who wanted that backstory and the romance, and we went complete with romance tropes and that, this one's right back to paranormal action adventure with humor, and of course the romance had a lot of humor as well. But instead of just doing a launch party, who cares? Yeah, we got a new book out, and there's going to be some fans that are there, and that's great, and love them. Gotta love those fans. But what Julie and I thought would be more useful, more fun, and more engaging is to talk about how different the two of us are. She is a plotter and a planner and a project manager and organized and it maps everything out and has calendars and lists and everything. And I kind of just go with the flow like a twig on the shoulders of a mighty stream, as Del Griffith says in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Just go with the flow.
Like a twig on the shoulders of a mighty stream.
I'm kind of cavalier, blue sky, let's see where the muse takes me, that kind of thing. We'll get there when we get there. Let's burn that bridge as we're crossing it. That kind of laissez-faire attitude. And you would think we would want to kill each other. And there were many moments of conflict. Not that we didn't want to kill each other. We love one another. But there were many moments of conflict throughout the writing of Hex and the City and even Lover's Moon where I would do things and Julie would do other things. So, for example, I would over-explain things and Julie would under-explain things. And, of course, because we were on opposite ends of the spectrum, how did we deal with that? How did we help one another out? But most importantly, how did two friends not only maintain this awesome friendship, but how did our friendship actually get stronger through this interesting, conflict and co-authoring? And I say conflict not in a negative sense, but I do say that we have our own ways of doing things, and now we have to adjust. how did we logistically do it? How did we actually end up plotting this out? How did Julie convince me to actually start plotting? How did we organize the writing? How did we organize the logistics of the publishing? And how did we, the contract that we used in terms of how this was going to work out? We're going to talk about all of those things. Yeah, it's kind of a neat way to celebrate the launch of the book. And of course, the book, Hex in the City, and even Lover's Moon will be part of the discussion, but it's not one of those, hey, everyone come here and we want you to buy the book. We'd love if you bought the book, but you, dear listener, are not the audience for that unless you really like, that kind of urban fantasy, paranormal stuff. But it's more or less something that we can do to share our experiences and potentially help other writers. So that is Tuesday, March 14th, and I believe it's at 7 p.m. Eastern, 2023. If you're around, we would love to have you come by and ask some questions about our co-authoring experience. But we do plan on laughing our butts off, because we did laugh a lot during the creation of this book. And so that is the end of my long introduction for this episode. Why don't we get on to this very wonderful, very insightful, very informative conversation that I had with Jeff Adams and Michele Lucchini about content for everyone. Jeff, Michele, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having us here.
So I am really eager to talk to you about your new book, which is releasing today, March 1st, 2023, the day we're recording this, not the day that this is going to be in the feed, but, somewhere in the not too distant future. So congratulations. So you've got a new book out. Before we get to the book, I want to talk specifically. I want to ask you guys about your backgrounds. And I'm going to start with Jeff, who I have spoken to before. And I believe I've had you on the Stark Reflections podcast before. Or was it the Kobo Writing Live? I can't remember.
It's Kobo Writing Live and no, Drafted Digital Live. We've done Drafted Digital Live.
Oh, D2D Live and Kobo Writing Live, didn't I? So way back when. But I've never had you on Stark. What's wrong with me? I'm almost 300 episodes in and I haven't had you on yet?
Who knows?
Oh, wow.
Pandemic time, everything's blurred together anyway. So,
but it feels like it because we know each other. And can you start with a little bit of your background? Because I do know you've got a writing background.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know each other because I'm a creative. I write books in the queer romance space and queer young adult. I have a podcast with the Big Gay Fiction podcast that has been going on now for 8 years.
8 years.
8 years, yeah.
Wow,
it's crazy.
Congratulations.
Thank you. In my day job for the last more than a decade now, I've been working in digital accessibility with a company called UseableNet. And what I do in that job is working with clients, large and small, all over the world, trying to help them make their website, their apps, their digital communications accessible with all that means. I have a certification on it, so I've studied a lot in this space, to help, get good and educated on it. And so all of that kind of meshes together in this book. The day job, the creative side, kind of came slamming together in this book.
Cool. And then, so Michele, you work with Jeff then? Is that how you two met?
I do. I got a, let's say, technical background. I have a master's degree in computer science. And right after, actually during the university, I started working with UseableNet. And I've always been interested into accessibility. Together with UseableNet, I had the opportunity to pioneer digital accessibility.
Okay.
And then, I met Jeff. We have been working together for a decade, at least, as soon as Jeff joined. And I've always been intrigued by the concept of making sure people don't feel forced to think about accessibility, but think about accessibility as an opportunity or a basic expectation. Very often, also working with our clients, we experience this concept of, oh man, accessibility, another thing I have to do. it is another complicated technical thing to do that is taking time for everything else. I think that what we are trying to do in our day-to-day job is to educate people that actually accessibility is more than just this.
Okay, I like that. So we haven't even talked about the title of the book. So Jeff, what's the title of this book that you guys just released today?
It is Content for Everyone, a practical guide for creative entrepreneurs to produce accessible and usable web content.
Okay. So the two of you gentlemen working together for about 10 years, obviously on accessibility and the importance of that. Why the book, the genesis of the book? And obviously it's for writers understanding this, correct?
For writers and really creatives in general. And that's
Okay.
that's why I went with creative entrepreneur, because it's for authors, podcasters, musicians, artists, really anybody who is running their own, small business. They probably run their own website, WordPress, Wix, Squarespace, whatever.
Right.
Maybe have a Shopify store or something like that. They have their newsletter platform. They're posting on social media. Maybe they have, PAs that are doing some work for them in those platforms, but they're mostly, working on their own. They're probably not that technical. They know how to do what they do. And, just my interactions with other authors and podcasters specifically, as I look around the space, it's hard for me not to notice accessibility issues.
Right.
Because I deal with them all the time. Color use, link text, images, alt text, all this stuff. And I know in my heart that it's not that these people don't want to make accessible content. They don't know what they don't know. And so they're not thinking about what, the impacts that their choices might have. And I'm like, I can write a book about this.
Okay.
There's a ton of books for authors and such out there, but this was really a niche that I hadn't seen. And so, about a year ago, it became the idea to make a book that, made it all on the level, not the way that Michele and I talk to our clients, but how we would approach this audience who isn't technical. I had Will in mind, my husband, as I was writing this.
Right.
Like, if we do this in a way that he understands and how to take the action, we've done it right. Because I'm his tech support. So if he can read the book and do it, we're good.
Okay.
And so that was the genesis of it. And I was talking to Michele about it one day, and quickly thereafter, it became a collaborative effort to do it.
Okay. So Michele, you have not written books before. This is obviously your area of specialties and passion and your technical background, but this is your first book?
It is indeed. Yeah, very first book.
So did Jeff ease you into the process? Was he gentle with you? How was that experience for you coming into this different world? Because I'm sure you've done technical documentation for work and stuff like that. How is this project different from other stuff that you've done in the past?
Well, there is, the attention from day one into the way we are going to communicate concepts that, as you said, are part of what we normally discuss with our clients. The idea was to make it simple without making it trivial.
Okay.
The idea was to be honest in the goals and have a communication that was fully focused on the understanding that an author might not be able to cover completely the topic of accessibility, but providing tools and actions to do something and check that what has been done was correct. We learn in accessibility that the key factor for success is the perception of progress. Otherwise, accessibility suddenly becomes frustration and gets deprioritized. The opportunity that we had, I think, working with authors is that we would expect, this is our assumption, to have people motivated, people that understand that while maybe in their space, their audience likes what they do, and normally they do what they like, that doesn't apply exactly in the same way to the way they convey the message. It is not just important convey the message in the way you like. You need to convey the message in a way that people can consume it, and the widest range of people can consume it with the widest range of abilities.
I love that. I love that. So it seems like accessibility is important for all creative types to assume, but I think, and I know you open up the book with some stats on the types, because again, one of the things I think about is, okay, I remember, when I load an image to Twitter, there's the alt text, and I want to describe it for those who are visually impaired and are unable to see the image. I want to describe what the image is, and that's a simple command that certain readers can relay. And otherwise, I'm leaving out a whole part of, especially if it's a visual joke. Like, I'm leaving out a whole audience who aren't going to be able to appreciate it. But it goes beyond that, right? Because there's different types of accessibility, different types of disability, etc.
And that same image can be perceived or not perceived in different ways based on those disabilities. So, I mean, you gave a great example of the alt text for a visual joke on Twitter. So you'll fill in that alt text, and for people who are using screen readers, they'll have that.
Right.
But if somebody might be of just low vision, for example, and if let's just think about a meme, for example, you've got the image and you've got whatever text over the top of it.
Right.
Somebody with low vision may not interact with a screen reader or an assistive technology that would bring that alt text to them. So does the color contrast of the text over that image, is it have enough contrast foreground to background that maybe a low vision user can perceive it?
Oh my God! So I have to jump into this then. What are some of the no-nos, or what are some of the things that you can do to make it better for low vision?
So color contrast there would be key to make sure that there's enough, differentiation between the foreground and the background. And there's a great color contrast checker that we list in the book that we could also give you for your show notes.
Oh yeah.
You just put the hex codes in, and it'll say this passes, this doesn't.
Oh really? Oh, so you copy the hex codes in, and it gives you a thumbs up or a knee. Is there like a yellow area, like caution?
There's not really a yellow area. It's like you either pass or you don't. But what it does allow you to do in the area where you're putting in the hex codes is there's a slider, so you can nudge the color darker and lighter to find what works.
A different shade of that color is a better contrast, and therefore it passes. Oh, exactly. That's fantastic. Yeah, I'd love to put those links in the show notes.
So, but another dimension to this same image, a cognitively impaired user, maybe they're dyslexic.
Okay.
What font did you use? Is the font clear enough in how it designates, I, capital I versus lowercase l versus a 1?
Right.
So that they can easily parse the font that you've presented and parse the font over the image. It just... All of this stuff, keeps, piling into the idea. So another thing you could do there, and it's hard to do on Twitter because of the character count, of course, you could go so far as to do an image description, which, kind of wrecks the meme a little bit, but describing it out even fuller, but in a post, so that I didn't have to go to the alt text to understand, but it's right there as a description of the image.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So that covers a few different types. Is there like a different example for a different other kind of disability that, to consider when you're sharing or creating content?
Yeah, we definitely can consider mobility, disabilities related to mobility. So that normally applies to the way a user might interact a web page. Without the possibility of using a pointing device, so using only a keyboard.
Okay.
That most likely it is, let's say, a technical aspects that sits into the template that we are using, or is something developers might need to fix. But it is important to be aware, together with all these abilities that are related to auditory aspects. So in general, I think that one rule is that do not rely on one single sense when you communicate.
Okay.
So the beauty of accessibility, the beauty of also of the guideline that we should consider when we produce content that needs to be accessible, is that there is really no particular distinction between the different disabilities. We need to know which they are. We need to understand the way any user affected by a disability or a combination of disabilities might interact with the web, with the podcast, with a post on social media. And then there are ways to address the issues at the root, so in our content, but also there are ways that are determined by the technology that these users are using. And the technology is a key factor. Substantially, a lot of the accessibility effort is to make sure that technologies are working properly. But this doesn't mean that we need to implement a content for a specific technology. The technologies are relying on standards. So the overall goal is to try to do something that is as much standard as possible. This is in short. The other aspects that I would like to highlight is that the book focuses a lot on communicating information around disabilities, around which are the challenges. Both Jeff and I are a true believer that if you know why you have to do something, you will be much more committed in doing that.
Right.
And I think that is a common theme for the entire book. So I guess that we invested more words in explaining why rather than telling what actually people have to do. But that is the key to, let's say, to hold our readers' hands through this journey of accessibility.
Oh wow! I'm starting to see things in a whole new light, which is exactly why you guys published this book. Because I'm even thinking about my book, Wide for the Win, and I'm thinking, like, I don't even have a chapter on accessibility. Like, that's the true publishing wide, so everyone can access it. So I have to go add a link to your book in the resources. At the very least, say you got to read this book if you really want your content to be accessible to more people around the world. But I want to go back to, Michele, something that you said that I think happens to a lot of people. They feel, oh no, it's another thing I have to do, and it's overwhelming, and I'm not technically competent. I'm not as comfortable with this. How do I ensure? And is it true? And either one of you can answer this question, of course, or both of you. The concept of, oh wow, it's just so much work, I'm not even going to do any of it. How would you address someone who approaches it with that panic of, I'm just going to mess it up? What I'm just not going to do any of it so I don't screw it up?
Yeah, I think that the panic is understandable. It makes sense because all the question marks around this topic, like I was mentioning before, you really cannot treat accessibility as a to-do list or as a checklist without knowing what it is or who you are doing this for.
Right.
I think that the best way to address it is a very simple concept. At least try to do something. Set an easy to achieve goal, and then starting from that, get your appetite.
Okay.
You can eat an entire elephant in one go, right? So you need to. Well, I mean that's probably not a great image, but yeah,
A lot of food, right? A lot of food.
Yeah, exactly, a lot of food. It is a step by step, but that's a fundamental aspect. And the other thing is that for an author, I mean, the mission is to have the message conveyed to as many people as possible. When we think about accessibility, it's all about the reach. So reaching your customers. You can translate it into both an ethical value and a business value. We listed the disability types. There is one that nobody actually considered, which is related to all the conditions that are generating a temporary disability. So I don't have my glasses with me. So can I still process the information?
Right.
I have the sunlight hitting my screen. Is the website I'm browsing still offering a decent contrast ratio? I have, I don't know, I broke my arm and I cannot use the mouse as I was used to do. Or I'm simply getting older. And as I am a web user, my expectation is to being able to use the web even more. Most likely, I'm expecting to use the web, in the same way I was using it. And I'm expecting that I will need even more to use the web. So simply the category of the elders is one of the, I think, aspects that are more illuminating around the size and the importance, sorry for repeating myself, from both ethical and business or reach-based reasons.
The thing I would kind of add to that is just what my own journey with this has been with my sites. I know all this stuff. I know beyond what's in this book. I'm not technical, so I am, I can only do so much in my WordPress instance, for example. It's been an evolution over the years. If you look at Big Gay Fiction Podcast, even the fundamental things of transcripts didn't start showing up for us until episode 180. Just like 3-something years into it.
Right.
And, and that started with just transcribing the interview to now where at some point we started transcribing the entirety of the episode. My colors still evolve and improve because I'll end up somewhere like, oh, those colors aren't quite right. I just need to go fix that. So it's really about, taking what we have in the book and we've broken up into 16 categories, these things that authors and creatives can most likely manage on their own. You may choose to take on one of them, take on multiples of them, and only do your content going forward. Like from now, I'm going to create better, more accessible. And you won't always do it right, and that's fine, but you'll do better. You may choose to go back and update your homepage, for example. Make that landing page better. You may do top-level pages better. You may do some things now and some things next year. You may do some things never. I think the only wrong thing is to do nothing. If you start doing something and start to, understand how to improve the content you're creating, then you're making a good choice. And the book simply helps to point the way in both like reviewing what you have and considering going forward.
Yeah, I love that. So this book, we are talking about the book on a launch day, March 1st, 2023. I am going to make an assumption that the book is broadly available in at least a few formats. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Absolutely. It's available everywhere as an ebook. I don't think there was a stone left unturned in terms of putting it somewhere. It's available as a standard print paperback and also a large print paperback.
Of course. Yes, that makes sense.
My first attempt at large print. So
how did that work? Did you use a certain tool? Was it Vellum? Was it some other tool that you used?
Vellum was brilliant. Okay. And then of course just working in Photoshop to expand the cover because we went 6x9 for the
of course.
Large
then you had to
print
go
as opposed to the 5x8.
7x, sorry, what was it for the
6x9 for the large print, and then the standard is 5x8.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right, and then a lot more pages, obviously, in that particular.
Yeah, it went from 150 at 5x8 to 200 and 6x9.
Okay. Oh yeah, of course. So you have to make those changes.
Yeah, and there will be an audiobook coming along at some point.
Okay. Well, speaking of audiobooks, so I encountered this only just recently, just maybe a month and a half ago, and then a couple weeks ago. And I had somebody reach out to me who wanted to read my book Wide for the Win, but was unable to even get, with a visual impairment, was unable to read even the large print version on their Kindle. There wasn't a large print book, and that's, shame on me. I haven't done any large print books yet. I'm still in the process of planning that out. And with most audio, I hire a narrator because they're professionals, and the only ones I've done myself are my books for writers, because like you, I've got the equipment and I have the means to do it. I just didn't have the time, because it would take about 80 hours to record a 400-page book. And this person reached out and asked if it would be an audio, and I said, I'm so sorry, I haven't had time yet, because where am I going to find 80 hours, right? It's going to be a lot of whatever. But I said, well, Google AI, I said, I could get this for you in just a few hours if you're okay with it. And they emailed back and said, yeah, I would love it. I just want to have access to the content. I just want to benefit from it. And within 2.5 hours, I had the version available for them, and I met them in person a couple weeks later at a conference. I didn't even realize it, and they, we had a chat, and he said, thank you so much for taking the time to do that. And I said, no, thank you so much, because the one thing I've never thought about in the AI discussion about morality and people out of jobs and stuff like that is, my book's now accessible to more people, and it wasn't. And I think of it more in terms of accessibility than in terms of, I put myself out of a job as a narrator. Doesn't mean I'm not going to do a version, but that came to mind. I went, oh my God, we have tools that can write transcribing podcasts. We have tools that can help us do this a lot more efficiently than, handwritten scrolls, I think, right?
Yeah, what you said is very interesting, and it makes me thinking that a lot is perception. Think about the perception of the person that reached out. They ask you a favor, while if you think objectively by their condition, that should be actually a basic expectation.
Yes.
So would you buy a car that the producer didn't have time to put wheels on?
Yeah.
No. So, but the fact that they have been used for years, since they start browsing the web, since they start reading, to have challenges in doing what everybody else can do normally, they feel that they need to ask a favor just for something that should be their rights. And this extends also to the concept of time. The fact that you perceive producing the audiobook as an additional thing, an accessory, that relates to the fact that you feel that you don't have time. But if your project originally included the audio version, if you plan accordingly, the time issue is also resolved. So I know that these are all trivial things, and it is easier to say than do it. But I think it is important, this attitude switch, this perception switch, and I think as authors, you guys have the opportunity to promote the message. Yeah. And I know that Jeff, you have a lot of opinions on AI as well. Do you want to address that?
Yes, I do, because I know AI in the audiobook space is quite controversial in some circles.
Yeah,
but it definitely has a consideration around accessibility for a couple of reasons. If you consider that some people who are disabled, they are underemployed, meaning that they're not employed to their full potential and skill.
Right.
They are more often underpaid for the work that they do. They have additional bills in many cases around healthcare, especially in the U.S. You know what our insurance system is like here. So they're not how much discretionary income they may have to spend on books and entertainment and whatever is more limited. So you consider they may not be able to pay for an Audible subscription or, a subscription to whatever audio service. A fully produced audiobook, and don't get me wrong, I love fully produced audiobooks. Love them. But if you're not buying with the subscription, that's 14, 15, 20, 25, potentially more money. You make an AI audiobook, it will go out for less money because there's not all the production cost in it. I would love to see authors embrace having both and considering it another format. You've got your ebook, your paperback, perhaps a large print paperback, your hardback, your AI produced audiobook, your fully produced audiobook. Because I've even seen some posts recently that I can't decide if I was surprised or not. It was an interesting point of view that there were a couple people saying that they love audio, but the performance aspect of it takes them out of the story for whatever reason. And that's, everybody's got their different ways that they want to perceive and take in story. So they were even happier with like having a Kindle Fire read it with the voices that are built into it, read the EPUB rather than a produced audiobook.
Right.
So there's something there for everybody. And there's a reason to have that lower priced audio to be able to, for people who can't afford it, for people who want the audio experience, maybe for people who don't want the performance audio experience, but may want something more than, I still find the Kindle, even though I use them all the time, the Kindle Fire voice is more robotic.
Yeah.
Especially when you compare it to like what Google Books is doing with its AI. So there's something there for everybody. And I think we need to look at that because I personally don't believe that like this AI replaces voice actors ever. What they do is art. This other thing is putting voice to a book to get it read.
Right. I love
now
that.
I'll get in trouble. I'm going to get hate mail for that.
No. I stand beside you, back to back. I got your back on this one because I agree that the value and even when I think of accessibility and you talked about affordability, that's a whole other accessibility that's why I want to make sure all my books are available at the library so that people can just download it for free on the Libby app or whatever it is it doesn't cost them anything. And I love that because it means more people have access to it. Again, in multiple formats. And of course I see areas where I have to work on that, but that's a good thing, right? To understand where I can grow.
I mean, it's the same thing as with digital accessibility. There's only so much time. So time does play into it regardless. The time that you can put towards, fixing a website or creating large print paperbacks, it's time. So that's got to factor in there too.
Right.
But the more that we can spend time and justify the business, because maybe the business doesn't justify the money to set up a large print paperback. It's still got to factor into it, but the more you think about it on a more holistic and wide-reaching level, the better.
Well, I'm gonna throw a stat out there, and this is based on my understanding of the print or the book business, is that still more people, 70 to 80% of people who read are reading print books. Therefore, just having an ebook version, which is everything's large print, is not making those large print books accessible to everyone, to most readers who will only read it if it's in a large print because they can't or don't read on a Kindle or Kobo or Nook or whatever the device is. So it's kind of like they're right there. I mean, I do know Draft to Digital, for example, wants to automate that process for authors to make it easier. Oh, do you want a large print version of the book? Click a couple buttons, bam, there you go. Right, all done for you, to make it as quick and easy as possible. So it's just an extra 5 minutes, not an extra. Well, even Vellum takes a bit of time, right?
A little bit. It wasn't bad. I mean, I was pleasantly surprised for my first go around. I think it took me longer to resize the cover wrap up from 5x8 to 6x9. But in terms of the time I spent on everything else, it was quite minimal.
Awesome. Gentlemen, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. As we wrap up, can you leave us with maybe some last thoughts about this? And also, please share where people can find this book online.
Yeah, maybe I can go first, reiterating probably the common denominator of everything we have said: progress over perfection. That is the key aspect to make sure that we play our role in the accessibility space.
Awesome. Thank you.
I would say the same. Like, start to learn what you can do. Don't get overwhelmed by it, and pick the things you can do and start doing them. But also spread the message. This is all over the larger companies that Michele and I work with every day. But, even your family members who are posting on social media, there's things they can do to make those posts more accessible to everybody. Move the education along too, so that we can get to a place, hopefully sooner than later, where the web is accessible and inclusive of everybody.
Yeah.
In terms of where to find the book, contentforeveryone.info. All the book details are there. Books available everywhere you buy books. Also available direct from our site too.
Excellent. And there will be links to all of the resources that you mentioned as well in the show notes at starkreflections.ca. Jeff, Michele, thank you guys so much for writing this book and for coming on the podcast to chat with me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Mark.
So a couple things I want to reflect on. Fantastic conversation. And actually, the three things I want to comment on or reflect on is, it's so funny when and I think I mentioned this in the interview, is when I was talking about Wide for the Win, 75% of that book is mindset. And I did not include the mindset of accessibility for people with different abilities and preferences and means to read. And so I need to go back and make some adjustments. But what I am going to do is over at markleslie.ca/wide-for-the-win, where I have the ongoing links to additional resources as things change in the industry. I'm going to add a link, obviously, to this book and their website and just for accessibility, because I think that's one of the greatest things you can do. So that's the first reflection. The second is when Michele said, and this is really powerful, I mean, a lot of it was powerful, but this just stuck with me, is do not rely on a single sense when you communicate. And not only is that so valuable to help you understand that maybe that's a single sense that is not appreciated, absorbed, a person is not able to take in that sense. So you expand it and use multiple senses so that other people can get that communication. So that's really, really cool. But the other thing about that, and it really triggered this memory, and this goes back to the earliest days of writing when I used to buy tons of books from Writer's Digest. They had a book club. And because there was no bookstore in the town where I grew up, it was an hour drive to get to one, and only one library that was always closed during the summer because it was attached to the school. So, Writer's Digest book club was a godsend for me. And I bought so many books on the craft of writing, and I still have probably 90% of them to this day because I've read and reread them. But one of the things, and this is so kind of comes back to this, is in order to make your writing better, try to touch upon the five senses. Try to touch upon as many senses as possible. So, and you can't do this all the time in every single scene, but as a writer, as this part of the craft of writing, is playing on the different senses. And not only does it make your writing more multidimensional because it's got all the senses, but imagine a reader going to appreciate something who doesn't rely on or use visual stimuli. Maybe those other senses make more sense to them. Maybe it helps draw them into the story more because that's a sense that's more important to them. Whether it's that they don't have one of the senses or access to one of those senses, or that one of the other senses is more critical and important to them. So not only the actual media, the actual story or book or whatever being available in the different senses and the way that you communicate, but in your own writing, is there ways that you can do that? And so I'm thinking about that, and that's going to be something I'm going to take with me as I go forward in writing. And then the last reflection is, and this is valuable. So Michele called me out on, and he didn't do it in a mean way. He did it in a very constructive, wonderful way. So it's not like I'd take this in a negative way, but called me out because I blatantly had the thinking that a large print book or an audiobook was an extra task. I said it. I'm like, well, I don't have time. It's too much, whatever. And it's like this extra task. Wow, you'd think I could speak. So thinking about a large print book or an audiobook is an additional thing to do, as opposed to it being a basic fundamental or expected task as part of publishing. I am publishing a book. It is going to be in all of these formats, rather than it's going to be in this format and this format, and then if I can get to it, I'll get the other format. So that's sort of a mindset change or shift that I think is critical, because I made that, and I continue to make those kinds of assumptions. And I think it's really important for me to take a step back and remember that, for example, I'm going to go back to print. Most people who read in print, and I know indie authors have so much trouble believing this, but the reality and why we think publishers have their heads up their backsides is because they operate in the world of print, and ebooks are like an additional peripheral thing for them. And they're in the business of shipping dead trees around. That is their business, and they're damn good at it. But it's because most people still read print books. And when you look at the stats, you have between 70 to 80% of people, and this is in the US, by the way, not just in Europe, where the percentages of print book readers are way higher. But because the ebook adoption hasn't been as strong as it has been in the US and the UK, most people still read print. Therefore, most people don't have access to large print. And making a large print edition available makes it more accessible for a huge number of readers. And so it's not just an accessibility thing, but it's also a business shift. And I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of waiting, because I have a lot of books. I'm kind of waiting for Draft to Digital to automate it for me, so I can just push a couple buttons, do the automatic cover wrap, and then suddenly get there. And you know, I'm looking at, okay, I can go use Dave Chesson's tool, Atticus. Sorry, I couldn't come to mind. I don't have a Mac. I've tried Mac and Cloud for Vellum. I don't have the patience for that. Or, you know, so anyways, I'm looking at ways I can do that. Or I could just take the time, and like I did for my print interiors, I can create a Word template and copy and paste my work into there. But I'll be honest with you, I'm really pushing for Draft to Digital to add the clickety-click barber trick. Because not just for me, it's not going to make it easier for me, but it's going to make it so much easier for everyone else to do that. So anyways, that's just kind of like, and I think it's important. So that understanding, when Michele just kind of reminded me that my perception was not necessarily as open or considering accessibility, that it's really important for us to be reminded of those things. It's really important for us to share as much as we can broadly, and to help more people understand why content for everyone is so valuable. And I do want to thank Jeff and Michele for coming on the podcast, for writing this awesome book, for making this information available so that more of us can understand the benefits for everyone when you do have content for everyone. So that is it for the reflections. That is it for this episode. Thank you so much for joining me this week. I will be back next week. I'm still going to be asking for you to share your reflections, please, for a forthcoming episode. We're only 6 episodes away now from episode 300, where I do want to hear more of your reflections. But if you want to hear some of my reflections and what's coming up next week, I'll be here, and I hope you will be too. So until next week and next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing, wonderful content for everyone, and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.